Leland Hayes, a 52-year-old American man, arrived alone in a remote village. In Venezuela, South America, the village faced a demographic crisis, almost exclusively populated by women. At the women's request, he fathered new lives with 24 Venezuelan women. Weaving a poignant tale, Leland Hayes at 52 saw a gaunt, weathered man reflected in the mirror. The soaring ambitions of his youth had long been shattered by life's relentless grind, leaving his chest hollow, much like the thinning hair on his scalp. Life in America hadn't been kind in the 90s. He had plunged into business with audacious plans, opening a tech startup, only to lose everything in the devastating bust. All that remained were staggering debts, estranged friends, and the heavy mantle. Aphalaretius deeply scarred his family. The economic hardship and crushing pressure of business failure ultimately destroyed his 10-year marriage. Consoled himself that at least there were no children. Perhaps that was a blessing in disguise. After the divorce, his life became aimless. A nomadic existence. He worked as a porter, a taxi driver, and a street vendor, but the heavy burden of life never lessened. He found it impossible to form deep connections with others' images of successful people. Our Hopi families on television seemed like stories from another unattainable world. Had built an invisible wall between himself and the world, until one day a sudden, overwhelming urge to abandon everything and simply leave took hold. He felt he had nothing left to lose, nothing to regret. He unfolded an old world map, closed his eyes, and randomly pointed a finger. South America, Venezuela. Why there, of all places? Perhaps the occasional news reports of chows and crisis resonated with the desolate landscape within him. A once oil-rich nation now groaned under the weight of political turmoil and economic collapse. Despite warnings about the danger, he was unswayed. In fact, throwing himself into that desperate reality felt like a fitting end to a meaningless life. He carried only the bare minimum of money and a worn canvas bag, his entire worldly possessions. Upon arriving at Caracas airport, he felt the pervasive chaos and anxiety, the weary eyes of the people, which only solidified his resolve to escape. He left the city, continuing westward. His ultimate destination was the Orinoco River Delta, a vast territory where the marks of civilization gradually faded. Countless uncharted waterways intertwining into Apramel wilderness. Scarcely marked on any map. With the little money he had, he bought a decrepit motorboat from a local one that seemed ready to sink at any moment. Aside from a few fuel drums and emergency rations, he had nothing else. He navigated aimlessly through labyrinthine waterways. Sometimes dense green foliage obscured the sky, at other times the wide river stretched endlessly before him. He tried not to think, simply surrendering himself to the rushing current, continuing his final journey. The day of destiny arrived without warning. The sky suddenly turned ink black, and a torrential tropical downpour began. The river swelled instantly, churning like a colossal ochre dragon, his small boat tossing helplessly like a paper toy amidst the pouring rain and fierce winds. The engine sputtered a few times, then died completely, surrounded by raging rapid sand. Impenetrable darkness. He clung desperately to the gunwale. Large debris flew past him. Was this the end? In his despair, his boat violently collided with a massive tree root protruding from the water. His body was flung from the boat. His head struck hard, and consciousness gradually faded into a deep, icy darkness. So long had it been. Leland Hayes vaguely regained consciousness, feeling rough creaking wood beneath him. His entire body ached, and his head throbbed intensely. He struggled to open his heavy eyelids and saw several unfamiliar eyes peering at him. Dark brown skin, long black hair, healthy faces tanned by Thesan and river winds, and in the depths of their eyes weariness mixed with intense curiosity. They spoke in hushed tones in a language he didn't understand. Observing Hayes, then a weathered, wise, middle-aged woman, Izana, cautiously approached. She touched his forehead to check for a fever, then brought a small bowl made of palm leaves filled with a bitter liquid to his lips. Hayes instinctively accepted and drank it. Chess spoke to the other women again. Where was he? How had he survived? Countless questions swirled in his mind, but he was simply grateful to be alive. As time passed and his strength gradually returned, Hayes learned he had been rescued by the Waro people, indigenous inhabitants living deep within the Orinoco River Delta. They were the Canope people, living in houses supported by stilts over the river. The place he was staying was a small village of several stilt houses named Oos. Calm waters, but the village's atmosphere contrary to its name was unsettling and oppressive. Most notably, there were no healthy adult men. Majority present were women. The only other residents were the elderly and pre-adolescent. Boisasana, the middle-aged woman who had cared for Hayes, was the village elder and de facto leader. She spoke a little Spanish in addition to the tribal language, allowing Hayes to begin communicating with her through gestures, drawings, and simple Spanish words. The story he heard from Isana about Awatronilis was tragic several years ago. A deadly epidemic likely introduced from the outside, perhaps measles or influenza diseases, to which indigenous populations had no immunity, swept through the village. The disease was particularly lethal to men claiming the lives foremost, all the adult males in the village, due to its isolated location with almost no interaction with the outside world. They received no medical aid and were forced to lose the pillars of their community. Thus, Awatronilis became a village surviving entirely on the shoulders of its women, fishing, obtaining daily necessities from palm trees, caring for children, all fell tough women. They were uncommonly strong and resourceful, but Sana's eyes held a deep concern for the community's future with the loss of their young men. The future of the community, with the diminishing laughter of children, seemed uncertain. Leland Hayes' arrival, a 50-year-old, robust man from the outside world, was like a boulder dropped into their quiet, secluded community. The initial days, the women observed him from a distance. Cautiously, the younger women especially stole glances at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity, but as they realized Hayes was severely injured and posed no threat, the weariness gradually subsided. Instead, his presence seemed to awaken a subtle expectation in the hearts of women who desperately needed male leadership, and labor time passed slowly in awe. Tronellis, with the sincere care of Thoreau women and the help of their herbal remedies, Hayes's body recovered little by little, but the barriers in his heart did not easily crumble. The biggest problem was language. The Warao language was unlike any he knew, and few spoke Spanish besides Isana. Sometimes he wanted to shout in frustration, but he held back and tried to communicate through gestures, expressions, and body language. The women, especially the children, would burst into laughter at his clumsy movements, which sometimes eased the awkwardness. He began to observe the daily life of the village, learning about Warao people. They were surprisingly resourceful. The Morris palm tree waist higher, very lifeblood. Its fruit became food, its sap became drink, and its fibers were woven into sturdy hammocks, baskets, and fishing lines. The women skillfully piddled their canoes through the labyrinthine waterways, fishing or gathering necessary supplies. Children were unafraid to play on the water, and even young girls adeptly managed their canoes, but their lives were far from romantic. Drinking water largely depended on rainwater, which was scarce in the dry season, and stagnant water was easily contaminated. As a result, children often had distended stomachs. Fishing wasn't always bountiful either, with many days yielding empty nets. As night fell, complete darkness descended, and an uneasiness lingered with the glowing eyes of caimans on the river banks, or the calls of jaguars echoing. Hayes felt he couldn't continue to be a burden. He began to look for ways to contribute to the village using his knowledge and experience. The first problem, he noticed, was the drinking water, using sand, gravel, charcoal, and palm fibers, all readily available. Around him, he constructed a simple but effective multi-layer filtration system when rainwater passed it. This device much cleaner water was obtained. The women, initially skeptical, were greatly surprised and expressed their gratitude after drinking the filtered water, and seeing the children's distended stomachs lessen next came increasing their catch. He demonstrated how to make finer and wider nets, a technique he had commonly used back in the States. He also shared knowledge about specific times and places where fish gathered, and how to use fishing gear. By adopting his advice, he were able to catch more fish than before. The abundance of food brought along absent vitality to the village. The most exciting moment was when he repaired the long, idle old diesel generator Leland Hayes had experienced separating various machines back in the States. He struggled for days tightening and adjusting parts, and managed to fabricate missing components using what was available around him. Finally, when Hester did the engine, the generator miraculously sputtered to life with a clattering sound. Connected to it emitted a faint but clear glow. The villagers cheered in unison. they were able to illuminate their world at night, which was a tremendous shock and joy for them. Children danced under the lights as if in a dream while adults looked at Hayes with profound awe. Through this process, Hayes established himself as a valuable guest and an essential presence in the village. Not just a stranger, of course, and Durstings, due to cultural differences, still existed. For instance, he emphasized efficiency, but the Wara people believed it was more important to follow the natural order he emphasis set in. Divil effort and achievement, but they prioritized community, harmony, and distribution. Hayes tried to recognize and respect these differences. He was not in a hurry and tried to integrate into their way of life, Isana quietly observed. Hayes and glimpsed his sincerity. The gazes of the younger women also began to change. Nia, a curious and bright 20-year-old girl, shadowed Hayes relentlessly. Becoming his personal attendant, she absorbed new knowledge like a sponge and constantly asked questions in broken Spanish, showing her curiosity about Hayes in the outside world. Alina, a quiet 30-year-old woman adept at herbal remedies, looked at Hayes with deep-set eyes, and whenever he was singered or tired, she would quietly approach him, offering herbs to heal his wounds. Her touch was imbued with warmth and solicitude. Ka, a 40-year-old woman, raising 2 children whose husband had succumbed. Tough epidemic managed the village's livelihood with unique resilience and inclusiveness. She seemed to find in him the sense of security and responsibility she'd once felt from her husband, often preparing warm meals for him or recognizing his needs and attending to them. First, Hayes sensed the women's directed gazes were changing. At first, it was mere curiosity and weariness, but now he felt that trust, respect, and perhaps even more were beginning to blossom. He tried to ignore its implications, but he could not deny that he was slowly being drawn to these women, vibrant in their harsh environment. His heart, once frozen by failure and solitude, was slowly thawing. Gone. The Orinoco, the dry season ended, and the rainy season returned. The Orinoco swelled relentlessly, but this year's rains were particularly heavy. Days and nights of torrential downpour led to a terrifying rise in water levels, threatening even the floors of Thevelage's stilt houses. The fragile stilts groaned as if they could be swept away at any moment, and uprooted trees and debris swirled down the river Awa. Tranilus faced an unprecedented crisis. The villagers were in a state of fear, as Sina calmly comforted the women, instructing them to gather what could be moved to higher ground. But there was no way to save the houses themselves. It was then that Hayes stepped forward. He recalled Hayes' experiences working on construction sites back in the States. We need to reinforce the stilts. We need to link the houses together to distribute the weight. Hayes explained his plan with drawings. She proposed adding the thickest and strongest trees found nearby next to the stilts, and that the houses should be tightly woven together using sturdy vines and palm fiber ropes. He also suggested installing tree barriers in certain directions to reduce the force of the current. The women, initially skeptical of his words, decided to place their hope in his confident demeanor and concrete plan in their desperatization under Hayes's guidance. The entire village rallied. The elderly men used their experience to help find suitable trees, while the young women braved the strong currents in their canoes to transport the trees and vines. Hayes personally plunged into the water, leading the work of bracing the stilts and tying ropes. Alina brewed medicinal herbs to bolster the spirits of the weary, while Naya tended her younger siblings and assisted the adults. Managed food distribution, maintaining the community stability. After several days of intense effort, they barrow limonage to protect the village. The turbid river water slowly receded. Andawas. Tranilus overcame a crisis that could have reduced it to ruins. This event was a decisive opportunity to further solidify Hayes's position. He was now recognized not merely as a technician, but as a leader who could guide the community in times of crisis. Women were deeply impressed by his wisdom, courage, and dedication, and their eyes were filled with a trust and reliance unmatched by anything in the past. After the flood, a period of calm settled over the village, but the underlying problem remained unresolved. The question of the community's future, the lack of a younger generation, still weighed heavily on their hearts. In the evenings, the women would gather around the campfire, talking quietly. Hayes couldn't fully grasp their language, but he could sense that the subject of their conversation revolved around him in particular. Isana and the older women frequently exchanged glances. Their expressions grave. Hayes, too, was tormented by a complex emotional struggle. He had gradually grown accustomed to life here, and his connections with the people were deepening. The water filter he had built still provided clean water, and the fish caught using his methods made meals more abundant. The light bulbs illuminating the nights symbolized hope for the children. He felt strongly that he was an indispensable presence here, yet at the same time, he remained an outsider. A sudden memory of the taste of a classic American burger, memories of the States, and the realization of his surreal situation left him confused. What am I doing here? How long can I live like this? On one hand, a rational voice urged him to leave, but on the other, a sense of responsibility to those who had saved him, a feeling of not wanting to miss the meaning he had found here, strongly shook him. Every night he lay in his hamakunable to sleep, watching the dark waves on the Orinoco. The river flowed quietly, but his fate seemed to be moving in an irreversible direction. One night, as a full moon turned the Orinoco silvery, Sana and the prominent women of the village, Nia, Alina, Kaya, and representatives of all ages came to Hayes's stilt house. Their expressions were more serious than ever, and the atmosphere was solemn. Hayes instinctively felt that what was coming had arrived. Isana spoke slowly and carefully. She began by talking about the positive changes that had occurred in the village since Hayes's arrival, expressing her deep gratitude. She praised his dedication in providing clean water, the increased food, the lights, illuminating nights, and most importantly, his courage and wisdom during the flood. Hazana's voice was low and grave. You are more than just a guest, Yome. Be a gift from the Great Spirit to our Agilis. She paused, looking deeply into Hayes's eyes. Then she again explained the desperate crisis facing the Villagethi, possibility of the community slowly fading away due to the lack of men. Imagine an empty village where the laughter of children has vanished. It's a terrifying thought, she said with a trembling voice. We implore you to be thesed for a new beginning for our tribe. Isana finally came to the point. Be husband to our women and continue new life on this land. Be a father to our children and rebuild this community. The content of the proposal was shocking. It was not just one woman, but all the fertile women of the village, from 20-year-old virgin Nia to 40-year-old widow Ka, and dozens of other women asking him to be their husband. Isana emphasized that this was a decision made according to their traditions, when they had to accept strong bloodlines from outside to foster the community's survival. And it was by no means frivolous or insulting. They had long observed Hayes's health, wisdom, sense of responsibility, and warm hearted had judged that no one else could be entrusted with this role. Hayes was stunned. As if struck by a hammer, his blood seemed to turn cold throughout his body. This was something unthinkable or unacceptable within the ethics and common sense of American society. It's not just one woman, but dozens of wives. The age difference was also a concern, but more fundamentally, the cultural and ethical barriers suffocated him. He couldn't say anything, simply sitting there. Blankly. From that night on, Hayes fell into deep anguish. He couldn't sleep. Nor could he properly swallow food. A fierce internal conflict raged in his mind. This is absurd. This is a sin I must escape from here. No, but at the same time, couldn't betray the desperate and pure eyes of those who had saved him, embraced him like familiand, now wanted to entrust the survival of their community to him. The moments they had struggled together in the floods of bright laughter of the children, the women's warm care for him, and their deepening trust all clung to him. 4 days he lay in his hammock, staring only at the river, paddled his canoe alone, wandering the desolate waterways, lost in thought. His mind was filled with his failed life in the States and the meaningful life here, a sterile, childless marriage, versus a sense of paternal responsibility he had never felt. In his life, a grotesque and powerful temptation. This might be God's last chance for him raised its head. He began to realize it. This was not merely a sexual request, but a desperate struggle for survival and an expression of their absolute trust in him. He went to Isana again and spoke for a long time. He spoke candidly about his cultural background and ethics, and explained how shocking and burdensome this proposal was for him. Isana listened patiently and again explained the Warao values and their community-centric way of thinking. She did not force him. She simply said she would respect and await Ha's decision. Hazi recalled the face of each woman in the village, one by one: the curious Nia, the quiet but strong Alina, the warm and dedicated Ka, and countless other women. He realized how deeply he had become intertwined with their lives and the community's future if he refused the proposal. And left, he felt he might spend the rest of his life in guilt and regret. Finally, after long deliberation, Hayes made his decision. He announced his decision in a trembling voice before all villagers. "I will accept your proposal." His voice was heavy, but his eyes were filled with solemn determination. "But promise me," he continued, "I will equally respect every woman here and fulfill all my responsibilities as a husband, father, and community member. The children to be born are our children. We must raise them with love and wisdom together. I will protect and nurture this village with you all prepared to bury my bones in a oase tranquillus." A momentary heavy silence fell upon the square following his declaration, soon beginning with Isanith. Women began to cry, one by one, expressing their joy and relief. Some embraced each other, while others simply nodded quietly. That night, according to Wara, tradition, a solemn and sacred ceremony was held to affirm Hayes and all the women of the village as a shared community of destiny. More than a marriage, it was a profound and desperate vow for survival and thefture. Hayes felt he had crossed a river of no return. His new life, a beautiful land, heavy fate on the Orinoco, had just begun. Leland Hayes's life was nothing short of a sea change overnight. He became the husband to dozens of women and the father to countless children yet to be born. The weight of responsibility on his shoulders was unimaginable, but at the same time, the fiery warmth he had never felt before filled his heart. The foremost task was to maintain harmony and order in this peculiar family structure. He sought advice from Isanond, the other older women, striving to respect the traditional Warao methods of community management. He tried to treat all his wives equally. He worked alongside them during the day and at night, visited each wife's home in a prescribed order. At first there was awkwardness and tension, but his sincere demeanor and respectful gestures gradually opened the women's hearts. The nighttime relations carried a meaning beyond simple physical union. It was a sacred duty undertaken for the community's future, a process of affirming each other's existence and strengthening their bond. He listened to each wife's story and tried to understand their feelings from the fresh passion of young Nia, the quiet devotional Alina, and the mature inclusiveness of Kaya. He expanded his understanding of humanity and life through his wives, each possessing different charms and personalities. Of course, wouldn't there be jealousy or conflict? But in the face of the grand goal of communal survival, personal emotions were somewhat controlled, and the wise intervention of Felders like Isana played a crucial role. As time passed, new lives began to stir like miracles. When Naya announced her first pregnancy, the Vilagis elaborated soon. Alina, Kaya, and other younger women also announced their pregnancies. Beyond the overwhelming emotion, Hayes became increasingly concerned about practical matters. How would he feed these growing family? How would he create an environment where children could be safely raised? He acted even more vigorously. During the day, he cultivated wider fields, increasing the cultivation of manio and corn, and sought to ensure a stable source of protein by inventing gay cessation. Fishing nets and traps. At night, he crafted simple toys for their children under the light of the generator, or planned the future with his wives. He was not alone. His wives contributed their strengths according to their abilities and roles. Alina used her herbal knowledge to care for the health of pregnant women and children, while Kaya effectively managed food distribution and storage based on her experience in managing a household. Nia demonstrated her ingenuity by quickly learning the new techniques Hayes taught her and disseminating them to other women. On the day his first child was born, Hayes experienced the most beautiful moment of his life. The loud cry of this tiny life strongly struck his heart. He held the bloodied infant in his awkward hands, shedding tears of emotion. His first child was Nia's son, soon Alina's daughter. Ka's son and their children of his other wives also came into the world. The village was once again filled with the laughter and crease off children. In just a few years, Hayes became the father of over 20 children, but behind the joy, hardship awaited. The increase in population quickly led to food shortages. especially during the dry season river levels. Dropped leading topor fish catches and crops in the fields withered. It was a difficult period where everyone had to tighten their belts. Hayes tried to obtain emergency food supplies by trading with merchants, but Venezuela's extreme inflation and scarcity of goods affected even remote villages, making it difficult. To make matters worse, skin diseases began to spread among the children. Rashes that initially appeared on some children gradually spread to others. Alina tried using herbal remedies, but with little effect in such circumstances. Without the help of modern medicine, it's impossible to pinpoint the cause. Watching the suffering children and the worried faces of his wives, Hayes fell into deep helplessness. He blamed himself for, perhaps, putting the children at risk. Then an unexpected dread arrived. These were illegal gold miners operating upstream who polluted river with mercury and gradually expanded their operations, even coming close to Oestranalas. For the residents of Ocasio-cortez, who had lived peaceful lives, avoiding external contact, their presence alone was terrifying. The village faced crisis once again: food shortages, disease, and now an external threat. Hayes bit his lip in despair. He could not give up there, where dozens of wives and children trusted and relied on him. He spent sleepless nights with Isana and other elders, racking his brain for solutions regarding the skin disease. Hayes recalled knowledge he had vaguely heard in the past, stories about the sap of certain plants having antimicrobial properties. He and Alina searched the surrounding forest for days, looking for plants similar to those he had seen in books, and finally found a promising one. When he carefully collected the sap and applied it to the children's affected areas, the symptoms unexpectedly began to improve. It wasn't a perfect cure, but it prevented the condition from worsening. To address the food problem, Hayes focused on the traditional wisdom of the Werao he learned from the elders, that even during the dry season there were places where fish gathered in certain deeper parts of the river, and by focusing on these areas, he was able to alleviate food shortages to some extent. He also diversified trade routes to gradually secure necessities like salt and cloth. The trickiest problem was the illegal miners. Confronting them directly was not enough. Hayes decided to draw upon the war's wisdom. For centuries, they had used the Orinoco Delta's complex waters to avoid outside invaders. Hayes planned to monitor the miners' approach with Asana, set traps artfully blocking channels or leading them astray to prevent them from getting close to the village. He also prepared a contingency plan for evacuation to a safe location. In case of an emergency. In this process, Leland Hesse was reborn as a true leader. He no longer worried alone. He constantly communicated with his wives, respected their wisdom and experience, and solved problems. Hager, in times of crisis, he displayed calmness and decisiveness, and his dedication inspired courage and hope throughout the entire community. He was not just a biological father, but the spiritual pillar and guardian of Austranilis. Through their difficult struggles, he and his large family became of a more united. Time flowed ceaselessly like the waters of the Orinoco. Over a decade had passed since Leland Hayes settled in Awa. Trinilis's black hair had turned whitened. Deep wrinkles etched his face, but his eyes remained clear and warm. He was the de facto head of a large family and a respected elder in the Awa Tranquilis community. Beside, his wives continued to love and support him over the years. Some had passed on, but those who remained relied on each other, leading the large family alongside Hasnia, who had brought him the joy of his first pregnancy, had come a middle-aged woman and had grown into a next-generation leader, following in Asana's footsteps, wisely guiding the community. Alina, a white-haired grandmother, still used her vast knowledge of herbs to care for the villagers' health. Strong and warm Ka Watso become a smiling grandmother, often singing old songs to her grandchildren. Most significant change was his children. Their number, originally over 20, had now grown to 30 and 40, and the first generation of children had grown in totals. They inherited their father Leland Hayes's rational mind and knowledge, as well as their Waro mother's strong survival skills and nature-friendly wisdom. They were bilingual, adeptly steered canoes, and knew how to repair simple machines. His children felt no confusion about their identity. Hayes had taught them both American and Warao cultures from an early age, emphasizing that both were precious heritages. He guided their children to be proud of their roots the children realized they were special beings connecting. The Orinoco and distant America, the fact that they were of mixed heritage was no longer a weakness, but a potential to understand and embrace a wider world. Trinellis was no longer the remote and depressed village of the past, thanks to the efforts of Hayes and the entire community. The village had transformed into a more stable and vibrant place. Food production had stabilized, and basic sanitation and housing conditions had improved. Some young people had also received education outside through Hayes's arrangements and had returned to contribute to the village's development. Learned knowledge to provide simple medical care and first aid assisting Lena, while another took on the role of more effectively managing external education. Of course, the difficult situation in Venezuela as a whole still cast a shadow. The chaos of the outside world indirectly affected even remote villages, and anxiety about the future had not completely vanished, but the people of Trinellis were no longer helplessly swept away by fate. They were ready to forge their own future with the confidence and unity they had gained from overcoming crisis. One evening, Moise lay in his hammock listening to the faint hum of the generator he had first brought to life. The Orinoco was turning golden, and around him he could happily hear the chirping of his grandchildren and the calls of his sons and daughter, squilling for their parents. Alina, one of his wives, quietly approached and massaged his shoulder. Suddenly, he remembered the moment decades ago when he had been desperately swept away by this very river. The Leland Hayes of that time and the Leland Hayes of today were completely different people. He had lost everything to come here, but he had gained so much more: dozens of wives, dozens of children, and a large family that had grown to hundreds. This was a life difficult to comprehend by worldly standards, but he had found true love, happiness, and meaning here. He believed his life was not just one man's story, but a testament to the miracle of life blossoming in despair, the possibility of love transcending culture and blood ties, and most importantly, the greatness of the human will to embrace heavy responsibility. He hoped his descendants would cherish and love each other as he and his warrior wives had, and lead this community more strongly and wisely. Leland Hayes slowly closed his eyes with a peaceful smile. The Orinoco still flowed quietly in the heart of Trinellis. The silent water was beating warmly with his large familia. His story was not yet over. It would now continue through his descendants, writing a new history of hope on the Orinoco. The miraculous life of one man, Bujan, on a forgotten river at the end of the world, was passing into legend through waves of the Orinoco carried decades. Leland Hayes's hair was now as white as snow, and his once strong shoulders were slightly bowed under the weight of time. He was over 80 years old. The stormy energy of his youth had been replaced by the calm of a serene lake, but his deeply wrinkled eyes still held clear wisdom and warm passion. Trinellis had become incomparably stable and prosperous, a stark contrast to when he first stepped foot in it. The stilt houses had been more robustly repaired, and the water purification system he had first created was now the village standard, providing clean water at night. The faint but clear glow of light bulbs illuminated every corner of the village, no longer a strange sight but a picture of peaceful daily life. The village had expanded slightly, but it still blended harmoniously with nature, maintaining its unique identity. Disking news from the outside world occasionally drifted in along the river, but Oas Tranquilis, with its powerful vitality, remained calm, as if slightly detached from the torrent of time. Hayes's days now revolved more around the role of the community spiritual center than physical labor. In the mornings, his grandchildren, Gathera Durand, his ancient hammock, chirping happily. They were children of different skin and hair colors, but they all loved sit on his lap and listen to stories. Hayes now told ancient tales, blending fluent English with his broken Spanish, amusing anecdotes about American traditions, stories of a distant country across the sea, stories of his adventurers, his youth, even heroic tales of overcoming crises together in Trinellis. The children listened to his stories, their eyes sparkling, summatizing him grandpa and begging for more. His wives, who had been with him for so long, were by his side. Nia, who had brought him the joy of his first pregnancy, had become a respected female leader in the village, following in Asana's footsteps, wisely guiding the community. Alina A. white-haired grandmother still used her vast knowledge of herbs to care for the villagers. Health-strong and warm could also become a smiling grandmother, often singing old songs to her grandchildren.
Oh.
Over the years, many of his wives had crossed the river to the land of souls, but those who remained were deep companions and strong supports for each other and for Hayes. Their relationship was different from the passion of their youth, but it was filled with comfort and the profound trust and love, created together over a long period that could silently read each other's hearts. Quietly share a cup of tea or watch the sunset together during the day. Hayes would watch the village continue its rhythm, feeling content. His grown sons were now excellent. Heads-off household, leading the young men out to fish or hunt, they skillfully assumed their livelihood responsibilities by combining the effective methods their father taught them with traditional war wisdom. His daughters had grown into strong and wise women like their mothers, teaching children crafting beautiful handicrafts or managing the community's households. In particular, some of his children utilized the strengths of both cultures to play unique roles. One son responsible for external trade brought profits to the community by combining his father's accounting and negotiation skills with war prudence, while Alina's daughter, combining her mother's herbal knowledge with the basic hygiene and first aid. Hayes taught her played an important role as a healer in the village. The seeds Hayes sowed had now grown into a lush tree surpassing his imagination and had become a pillar supporting the entire community. One afternoon, a small festival was held in the village square. It was a gathering to thank the spirits for abundant harvest, sand to bless new infants. The aroma of delicious grilled fish and baked cassavo bread permeated the air, and the laughter of children and cheerful songs of adults reverberated along the riverbanks. Hayes sat in his hammock, prepared in the best spot, watching the scene. He no longer commanded or led. He simply responded with a gentle smile. Topol was greetings and patted the heads of grandchildren who came to him. Joking people respected him without burdening him. He was not an autocratic leader. Buddha, grandfather, father, and wise counselor to all, a young man approached and handed him the best ripe mango and a young granddaughter. With clumsy skill, placed a flower necklace around his neck. He felt the heartfelt love and respect contained in those simple gifts and was overcome with emotion. This was the great accomplishment of his life. Fine the evening as the festival neared its end. Hayes slowly stood up and walked towards the riverbank. By his side, his eldest son, Nia's son, now middle-aged, approached and supported his arm. The son looked into his father's eyes and quietly said, "Father, seeing everyone so happy today, I am even more grateful to you. Without you, our village might not exist." Hayes gently patted his son's shoulder and replied, "No, my son, what I did alone was nothing. This was possible because Will did it together. Without the strength and wisdom of your mothers and the efforts of all of you, it would have been impossible. I was here when I was needed." There was no exaggeration or false modesty in his words. This was the truth he had realized throughout his life. He had learned herein Tranilus that true greatness did not come from a single hero's actions, but existed in every person in the community, trusting and relying on each other and overcoming difficulty. A start. The red sunset painted the Orinoco, creating a magnificent sight. Hayes gazed at the river, lost in thought. Decades ago, he had lost everything and left the States in despair. Perhaps his life here felt even more precarious space. He had experienced failure and loss there. He silently thanked Hayes' eventful destiny and was grateful to have finally found a happy life. There were no regrets. His life was different from the world's standards, but it was more fulfilling and meaningful than anyone's. Now his role was nearing its end, but he was not afraid. His blood and spirit would continue through his countless descendants, illuminating the future of Awa Tranilus. The warm community he loved and the wives he cherished would flow as steadily as the Orinoco into Theffature, as night deepened and stars poured over the river. Hayes felt the warmth of his family surrounding him and peacefully closed his eyes. His last breath drifted on the Orinoco wind like an eternal blessing to the land and people he loved. Leland Hayes' name will now become a legend of Awa's Tranquillus, long remembered as a symbol of love and responsibility, transcending borders and cultures and Of hope that blossoms even in despair, his story beginning in the heart of the Ororonacothis found a warm and beautiful